Welcome to With You Podcast.
where we explore relationships and life transitions.
I'm David.
And I'm Tara.
And we're in relationship.
And transition?
Well, we're transitioning from a long weekend of teaching.
Yeah. I mean, aren't we always in some sort of transition?
Yeah, but this weekend it was kind of fun. It would have been more fun if we were teaching together.
Yeah, we were doing our own thing.
Yeah. And
really haven't seen you for a while. You were teaching a really intensive class, and I was teaching an intensive doula workshop, and it was all day, every day for 3 days in a row.
I like the one midway through, we went out to a restaurant and we both just sat there looking at each other.
I know. That doesn't usually happen.
No, there was usually conversation, but we were both really comfortable in the silence. Yeah. I think Bob, our waiter, was a little concerned.
Yeah. We were a little brain dead.
Yeah, just sat there. And he's like, "You guys okay?" We're like, yeah, we're enjoying each other's company.
This is totally fine.
Everything's fine. So what were the standouts of what you taught this weekend?
So I'm training doulas in all the things to learn how to support families.
All the things?
Well, that's the problem is because it seems simple. And that's what a lot of them said about it too. They're like, it seems like this should be simpler because it's something people do every day since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
And yet there's so much to learn about how it works. So we talk about just the process of physiologic birth, which often isn't even something taught to OBs, midwives, and nurses. Well, midwives are different.
So you just get deep into the body.
We do.
Well,
well,
let me rephrase that. You focus on the physiological birth. I like how you said it better.
We do. And then in how we can support that process, the hormonal process, the biophysical stuff that's going on, the mechanical process. And we talk about a lot of the interventions and choices and options we have for managing pain, but then the emotional and mental part of it and coping strategies and business practices and just a lot.
Elevator speeches of what do you do and how do you talk about a doula in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing that I think that doesn't get appreciated that I've learned more and more just listening to you is how much of a relational expert. So yes, it's about the body, it's about a natural body process, but the relationship between the person and their body, the bodies in the room of the caregivers, the hospital staff, the doula. I mean, it's a fascinating system. It is.
I know.
I just love it.
I know. That's why we both love this kind of stuff because it's never just about an event that unfolds.
No, or pain.
No.
Right.
I mean, pain is a part of it, but it's so much more about what's happening between everybody in the room, how that person is interpreting what's happening and how that defines their identity. And so, yeah, there's a lot of layers.
So like our teaching overlaps so well, even though we were on completely different ends of a content spectrum, because I was talking about mental health and leadership, which was fun because it was a whole different people and like non-therapists. It's so much fun to teach people that are not therapists.
Or they're coming from a different framework.
Yeah. And everything was new. It's kind of like, oh, this makes sense. But when you package it in a certain way to understand, oh, this is about me being centered, being able to model things. Maybe I'm modeling things for my family, but I'm also trying to model things that are going to be effective for the individuals, but also for the outcome. You could put leadership or working for a church ministry or for a Fortune 50 company or for a birth process. The process is really similar.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about relationships today. This is kind of where it comes out of.
Right. I mean, it all connects. You and I feel like are in a pretty comfortable stage in our relationship after being married for 30 something years.
Yeah, but not complacent.
Not complacent.
Comfortable.
Right. But we're not having to struggle through what we think is important as far as like just defining what a good relationship is and stuff like that. But a lot of the young people we've talked to, people that our kids know or people in our marriage workshops have given us some questions about like, how do I know what's normal in a relationship? How do I know what red flags are? And there's a lot of myths out there about what makes a good relationship.
Yeah. And we've kind of clustered those together for 5 conversation pieces.
Yeah. So we're going to bust some myths.
Oh, and I love being, I don't think I can say a myth Buster, because isn't that like
There's a
copyrighted by a
show, but
TV
I
show?
think you're allowed to
Okay,
use the
we're
word.
going to be a relational myth buster,
There you go.
and we'll see if it's plausible or busted.
There we go.
And so we will
Yeah.
kind of go in, and I think it does apply for comfortable couples like us,
Yeah.
as well as people seeking out relationships or in early relationships. So I'm excited about busting some myths.
Yeah, no, and I think it's helpful for people who are looking for a relationship and looking to know what is kind of a deal breaker or something they're looking for. But it is still, even in our phase of being married for a long time, we can revert back to thinking some of these things are true.
Yeah.
And so it's reminding us that, there are some things that we're led to believe that make a good relationship that aren't necessarily true.
Yeah, they're lies from the pit of hell.
Maybe so.
Maybe so. We'll decide.
Let's see.
Maybe we'll figure that
See
out.
where they're from.
So which one do you want to start with?
Well, let's start with...
Are we going to go in order?
Let's do that. Just for funsies.
All right, we'll go in order.
Let's go in order.
We'll try something new this time.
Okay. So the first one that we hear from people is that good relationships don't require work.
Oh, yes. The effortless love.
Right. Like if you're working too hard, it must not be meant to be. It should be smooth.
Fit like a glove.
Yeah. Should be easy. That means you're a good fit, right?
No.
What do you think?
I think that's
Busted.
not true. I mean, I think if you're really working, if you think, oh, it'll just come easy, I think there's a fantasy there that comes from movies. Like I'm looking, and even Greek mythology, I'm looking for the other half. And if I have the other half, will fit perfectly.
Then it just makes everything make sense now because I found that person that's the other half of me.
And you and I both know that the solution to all of life's problems is marriage.
Right.
As soon as you get married, all the problems go away.
That's right.
There's nothing. I mean, we wouldn't have a career if that was true.
That's true.
Because it's not. It actually, when you get close to someone, you highlight all the differences.
Yeah. But I think the danger on the other end of this myth is that, if we think, oh, well, relationships are hard, relationships require tons of work, then we're saying it's just gritty all the time. And the truth is, a good relationship should be life-giving.
Yeah.
There should be some life-givingness to it, but that doesn't mean it always just comes very easily and smoothly.
Yeah, I always think in sports metaphors. So I think in sports metaphor of like, I love baseball, and to be good at it, I had to practice. And I think in relationship, like we love being together, and we have to work on it. The skills do atrophy if you don't practice. I mean, we know that when we travel, of having to kind of get back into the flow with each other after being gone for a while. Takes some intentionality and effort. It's not just like, come sit down and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah. Well, and I think by nature, most humans want to take care of our own needs first.
Yeah, that's
so it takes some practice to always be thinking about the other person. Or some people get too far into denying all of their own needs and completely taking care of the other person. So it's finding that balance does take some practice and some work.
Yeah, and I think we talk about this of it needs to be a back and forth. So if we are both in agreement of caring for each other, then our needs will get met because we're caring for each other, and it gives us space to care for the other. It becomes this kind of self-propagating process.
Mutually influencing system.
Yeah, because if I'm only looking out for me, then you're only looking out for you. It's not a relationship, and it has to be both. So if I'm always giving, then it doesn't allow you a chance to give. So there has to be this kind of give and receive, this live into being curious about you, but hopefully also being vulnerable and sharing about what's going on for me so you can be curious.
Yeah.
So this kind of work is the back and forth, not keeping score, but this back and forth of, I'm going to care for you, and that's going to be some work, and I'm going to be vulnerable, and that can be some work. And each person, it's going to be different, which is work.
Right.
Like some people being vulnerable is work. Other people being vulnerable is super easy.
Right.
And the reverse is true.
Yeah. So we know that and we're agreeing here that love is not effortless. It's not completely effortless all the time, but there might be a time when the amount of effort that's going into it is kind of a signal that maybe it's not working super well. So what would you say about when like, okay, this is so
Oh,
much work. It's so exhausting.
you beat me to the question because I was
Yeah.
going to ask you, when was the hardest time in our
Oh, in our
relationship?
personally.
So you asked general, and I was like, okay, I'll answer generally, and then I'll ask you, when was the most effort we had to put into our relationship? For me, I think in general, it's times under stress of like, we can, if everything's okay, things will go okay.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as there's an external stress, it puts stress on the system. And if we're not having good practice of attending to ourselves and each other, it's going to break down really quick.
Yeah.
So I think about stress. So now I'll ask you my question. When do you think it was took the most intentional effort in our relationship?
Well, I think with any relationship at the very beginning stages, you're figuring that out. Like, how much work does this take do I want this to keep going? Do I keep adding to it? So, like in the dating years,
Yeah.
I feel like more intentionality was put into planning dates and finding out what our compatibility was for the kinds of things we like to do. It wasn't the kind of effort that was exhausting or painful, but it was like
Yeah.
very intentional
Yeah.
effort to building our relationship. I think the times when we would probably both say it was harder was when we were both depleted,
Yeah.
when
It
you were
was
in
grad
grad
school.
school. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even say that was when we had to put more effort into it. I would just say that's when we felt the most depleted because we didn't have energy to put into it.
Right. Which then also put another strain because we needed each other and we hadn't built into that.
Yeah.
And so it was that recursive system towards problems.
Yeah. Well, and I remember those conversations of sometimes when, we would finally have a moment to talk and I would say, this is like, I am not feeling seen or we are not connecting. And we both were like, well, what can we do different? Because your grad school is so demanding. My raising a couple small babies was so demanding. We were like, I don't even know what we can do differently here.
But I think that conversation was us doing a little work. Like we were
Yeah.
open with each other and it's like, yeah, we got very little, or we have, let me use proper English, we have very little to give, but having the conversation of we're both right here, we want something different, it's a season, that helped us through. I mean, it didn't feel great.
No, because I can remember you even saying like, well, should I just quit grad school?
Yeah.
Like I don't know how to do this different without,
Giving
completely
up on something.
right, just dropping something. And then we made the joint decision, no, we're going to plow through this and we're going to hope we still like each other on the other side.
I think that was the start of a bad habit. Because
plowing through
is our go-to. It's just like, let's put our heads down and go.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, and it was realizing, I think for us in our relationship and for me in grad school is realizing I can't do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to be just good enough. And it was a time when I shifted to what do I have to learn versus how am I getting grades? And I think for us, it was like, what's vital for our survival through this push? And then what will we need to focus on later? But man, I'm getting PTSD.
Right. But I think the key is just voicing it. If somebody in a couple is feeling like this is a lot of work, or I feel like this is more effort here to go, round and round with the same issues, having a conversation about it is probably the first step. Like, is it just me? Is this harder than it should be? Is there something we could do differently?
Yeah. And it goes back to, we've had this conversation of a lot of the research shows there's a lot of things that won't be resolvable. And so how we approach it, how we talk about it, it won't be a fix, but we're in it together. Even if we don't have any energy to be in it together, we're in it together. So this idea that relationship's just going to be lovely. I mean, it's super romantic fantasy. It's why I kind of like, I'm born on Valentine's Day. I get a little sick in my mouth about Valentine's Day because it perpetuates this idea of if things feel good, it's a good relationship. And that's not true. Work in the relationship can have positive connection, but it's still, there's an effort that needs to be put in. And so, yes, romance is nice, but I think it's overrated.
Wow, that sounds so hopeless. I hope this is going to get better because that,
well, I just realized what I do for a living. That's probably not the best thing to say as a marriage therapist.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to say, let's just reframe this a little bit.
Help.
So relationships don't have to be effortless to mean that they're working.
Correct.
There's always some effort in joining up with another human being, especially a lifetime of, figuring out how we love each other well. So there's always going to be some effort, and that's normal in a relationship.
And just a highlight for next week we're going to talk about when it's too much work and the relationship might need to end. So we're not going there today. Today's the positive.
No, but do follow up with us next week if you want to talk more about boundaries and deal breakers.
Yeah, that's right. So let's go to number 2.
All right, myth number 2. And
fix it by having a baby.
So this myth says that taking the next step will solve the problem or will determine whether the relationship is meant to be. So that means and I don't think we ever felt that way, but we do know a lot of people and a lot of young people thinking, how do we know if we're a good fit unless we live together first? Or we should have sex to see if we're compatible physically. Otherwise, we might get stuck in a marriage where we're not. Or if we have a baby together, that's gonna seal the deal, So those kinds of ideas that if we do that next thing, that's gonna be the thing we need to help us know.
Yeah, and in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were some really good studies about, because the assumption was cohabitating before marriage would be really, really helpful, and they found that it wasn't helpful for a long-term relationship. And so this whole idea of test driving doesn't solve the problem. And and it's really kind of a denial of let's be right where we need to be. You and I think developmentally all the time. This is kind of a developmental shift of I don't like where I am, and so I need to go to the next phase. Well, this phase is important in and of itself. Like where we are, how we're navigating this is important in and of itself to just jump to the next thing. And anytime you think adding another human being will make it easier is a big myth.
Yes.
Because it adds some other levels of difficulty. Not bad, but it's not going to make it easier.
Right.
And so this kind of, you fix it by doing something else. Yes, we want to do something else relationally. We don't want to speed through the developmental task that we're in to the next thing.
Or check it. And I think the way we think about this differently is I didn't really want to go through all the stuff of merging our lives and living with you unless I knew we were already committed to life together. And that's not the way everybody thinks about it. I think they'd like to see, let's see how this goes. But I think that already puts an out into the situation.
Yeah, an escape.
Yeah, because if we're not married and we're checking it out, the first time you're leaving your dirty underwear everywhere, I'm like, out. But if we're already committed to life together, it's there's always going to be some hard things about merging your life with any human being. And if we're committed, then we're committed to figuring that conflict out.
Well, and as a couples therapist, that's the very first thing of we establish to actually foster repair, growth, kind of solving problems is close off the escapes. Mm-hmm. So you're in, right?
This also sounds kind of like close off the escape valves.
Well, what I mean is, we can escape intimacy in lots of different ways, like affairs or substance use or staying at work longer. Mm-hmm. There's lots of ways. Some are not socially appropriate or approved of. Others are, but it's all about here's where I can get away from this. And what you're saying is our view of a committed relationship, our view of marriage is you're entering into it without any escapes, and we're going to need to make this work.
Right.
And it's not it sounds, when I say it like that, it sounds pressure filled.
Right.
But there's a freedom to it.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's the thing that's hard for people to understand, the freedom of being
Of
locked,
security.
of security,
Yeah,
of
of
being
being
locked
locked
in.
up into a room together forever.
No, yeah, but I think it's with that understanding
Security.
that
Let's talk
it's
about it as security.
security because it is a choice of saying, I'm making the choice to love you and commit myself to you, knowing there's going to be some hard things, but and deciding I'm going to love you
Right.
for who you are and just take all those things on
Yeah.
as well.
And when we
You know,
say hard things to each other, knowing it's okay, we're going to have to stick through this rather
yeah,
than say hard things and then boogie,
right,
kind of a drive-by fight. And
yeah,
that a lot of times that happens. And that's the insecurity of if it's not a commitment. And so then the question that it doesn't create safety and it leads to more fragmentation. So the challenge is, how do you know this is the person to commit to? It's not that kind of romantic fantasy piece.
yeah,
For us, in kind of how we mentor young couples, is it's getting feedback from people in your life that know you well, that you trust. Of we did that. We had our
yeah.
families check each other out.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think it was. I think it was just a response thing. I don't think we intentionally, I mean, we intentionally did it, but I don't think we thought about it as this of like, we're seeing if
Oh,
it's
I
going to be
did.
okay. Okay.
I mean, I think
I just naturally, my family needs to like you. Otherwise, you're
yeah,
not going to
yeah.
be part.
Same,
Yeah.
same, because we both believe that when we choose a person, we're choosing the family that surrounds them, or we know that that's going to be part of life,
Yeah.
is being part of those family celebrations and holidays, and those will be the grandparents of our children,
Yep.
and just accepting that as part of the package.
Yeah. And our kids did that. I was impressed because we didn't necessarily make it an overt statement, but they took their friends, they took their significant others. Right now, it was their wives, to meet their friends, to meet all our family, extended family. They did the whole circuit. I wonder what it was like for our daughter-in-laws, but they did the same thing.
Well, yeah, and I think it's not about saying, "Here, I'm gonna introduce you to get approval from everybody else," but it's saying, "Let's, let's see how these systems will fit together."
Yeah,
Or, for us, when we met each other's families, it was
yeah,
kind of like if they raised some things that I didn't see, it's worth considering if this is
hmm
a good fit for me.
yeah. And looking at, not do you think this is the right person, but do you see any red flags?
Yeah,
And there weren't any. Our parents said to each of us, we'd rather keep the other.
that was really hurtful.
I know, but at least it was a mutual hurt we both experienced.
Yeah, and it was a wholehearted acceptance, which helped confirm that this is a good choice
Right.
for a lifetime.
And if your community has that, then there's the support. Like it's why we have weddings where people come. It's not just a party. It's they're saying they're committing to holding us accountable. I love that about weddings. I wish that would be much more of a cultural thing. Like people are going to weddings to say, I'm committing to your relationship. Not in
Hmm.
an intrusive way,
Yeah,
but I'm committed to holding you like, hey, if you come to me and complain about Tara, I'm going to turn you back to her. You guys have to work this out.
right. And that's something my parents made really clear too, that once we're a couple, they've accepted you as their son as well.
Yeah.
So don't come to them if I'm complaining about you because you're not an outsider
Yeah.
to our family now. You're an insider. And so we need to deal with that ourselves or find outside help.
Yeah.
But the family is going to support both of us, not just one of us.
And fortunately, we had trusted family members. If you don't, then it's who's your close chosen family that can speak into that. Because I know some families, they hear from their parents, and because their parents say, I'm concerned about this, they're like, I'm going to prove you wrong,
Mm-hmm.
rather than being
Mm-hmm.
open to influence. And so it might not be your family of origin, but who is your community that can speak truth to you and you can hear, because that's going to be necessary rather than fixing it with a commitment or a ring or a baby or a sports car. I don't know what you're going to fix it with. Fix it face to face,
Yeah.
with the support of your community. So we have the really gross romantic stuff myth, We also have like, don't fix it by having another human
What's the
being.
gross romantic stuff
Well,
in
that
there?
was the first one.
That all relationships, if they're meant to be, are easy. That's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
gross
yeah.
romantic stuff.
The
Okay.
effortless love. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah, yeah.
I'll try to be more romantic, honey. So we talked about red flags in community. I think the next one is, let's talk about people thinking arguments and fights are red flags.
Yeah.
That's a, how do you feel about that? Do you think if we fight, we're in trouble?
No.
Oh, good.
I mean, we're not a high conflict couple though. So I think we've also heard like if you haven't fought a lot, then you're not dealing with stuff.
Yeah.
So I think there's information on both ends of that. But I think a lot of people do say if you're fighting, that's a relationship failure.
Yeah.
And that's a big red flag that something's deeply wrong in your relationship if you're fighting.
Well, and cultures can communicate that. We were speaking overseas where they were like, can you please talk about conflict? Because right now in the church, if there's conflict in a marriage, they think they're getting divorced because it's not healthy. And we had to just go, oh, yeah, conflict's fine. And then we fought in front of the whole church. It was great.
Well, yeah, I guess we tried to simulate an argument, but yeah, and culturally, there's different levels of what's seen as normal too. Is the way
Yeah.
you express yourself
Yep.
overtly or whether you keep it inside, and so it can look different in lots of places.
But it's the avoiding difference. It's how are you navigating difference?
How are you navigating difference is a
And
good way to put it.
arguments can be fine. With my students and with people I supervise, I often say it's not the rupture, it's not the tension, it's not the challenge and the difference that's the problem. It's the lack of navigating it or the lack of repair. So I kind of say if it's not the rupture, there can be relational rupture. It's the lack of repair that's the problem. And so the idea of conflict and argument can be towards repair. Now, if it's violence, if argument is not about navigating difference, but dominating, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, yeah,
Whole different ballgame.
yeah.
So it's kind of normalizing that we're not going to see, it's weird, right? We're not going to see things the same way. You and I figured
Yeah,
that out real
strange.
quick.
Yeah.
That we see the world differently.
Yeah. So conflict actually, and we have talked about this in some marriage workshops, is that conflict can actually be the pathway to deeper connection
Yeah.
if we deal with it well. So like you said, there are definitely deal breakers with conflict.
Yep.
If there's physical violence, if there's harm, if there's emotional harm,
Isolation.
that's not okay. And that definitely can be a deal breaker or something that needs really quick intervention and help and support. And possibly it's not a relationship that's going to work for you.
Yeah.
Very possibly. So we'll talk more about that next week. But most of the time, a conflict between a couple that's committed to each other, they're wanting to resolve the issue, and they're not trying to harm each other. They're just finding some disagreement, and they need to figure out a way to navigate that without hurting each other.
Yep. And resolution may be what they both like, what neither one like. That doesn't matter. It's how are we connected as we disagree. And I think societally we're having a problem with that, both in the American church and American society, is if I disagree with you, I'm negating who you are.
Yeah.
Is kind of the underlying cultural message of the moment.
Yeah.
And if I disagree with you, let's kind of find common ground and find places we can just kind of sit and go, okay, I still love you and I see this very, very differently.
Yeah, I know. And we're challenging that because should be a huge part of being human is learning how to love people even when we completely disagree
Yeah.
on some things. Yeah, so I think the language you're using for rupture and repair is from John Gottman, right?
Yep.
And so they also say like it's those small things often, and it's how you repair that conflict that really tells whether you're going to be able to be healthy in that relationship.
Yeah. And a lot of the positive interactions before you get to the crisis or to the conflict. Let me rephrase that, not crisis. A lot of positive moments before you get to the conflict, because conflict doesn't have to be crisis, but it can feel that way. But if we have safety built up, then we're able to navigate that well. What are, like, for us, I mean, we've been thinking about connection, communication, conflict. What are some things, kind of tools or ways that we encourage people
to
navigate conflict, to kind of sit and argue and
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this, so maybe we'll link to this episode too. We talked about our cheers model for communication.
cheers.
So it's just a nice acronym that helps us to remember some ways we can be in sort of our stance towards the other person.
Yeah.
Because if we're coming in trying to prove our point, or coming in trying to prove why the other person's wrong, like I have probably spent some years trying to prove why the Midwest is a worse climate than, than the West Coast or something like that.
You've been very persistent.
Yeah. So if that's our stance, we're probably not going to find resolution or compromise, because Gottman also shows us that almost 70% of couples conflicts are not resolvable.
Yeah.
Meaning we're not going to ever completely agree on this. So how do we stay in relationship with each other
and have difference
and still be on different sides of that?
Yeah.
So we talk about starting with curiosity. So like finding out where the other person is really coming from on it.
Mm-hmm.
The more I learn about why you think that way,
Yeah.
or why you stand firm in that belief,
Yeah.
the more I understand who you are, and I'm not as quick to try to change your mind.
Well, and I love your curiosity, because it's really deep listening. You're not, because sometimes we have a conversation and I can see you're just thinking about your response to say how you disagree with me. But when you're curious, there's this kind of openness of, I want to understand it fully before moving on, rather than yeah, and now here's my idea.
Right.
And
right.
so,
And that's the way a lot of fights go for people, is just, you finished because I got my response ready, and I'm going to try to keep convincing you, or I don't understand where you're coming from. So then the next one is humility, which is just coming in with already believing I don't know everything about everything.
Yeah.
And that's a hard one for a lot of people. It's just like, I really feel strongly, and I haven't taken that little step down off my pedestal to say maybe the other person has some validity there too.
Yeah. Being firstborns, we grew up knowing we were right. So that's a challenge. And then kind of seeking to enter in with the other. So empathy. There's a lot of being written about right now of good and bad around empathy. It's really, am I with you? So it's our brand, right? With You podcast. It's about, am I with you? Can I enter in through curiosity and humbleness, kind of enter into the pain that you're at, not taking it as my own, right? It's your pain, but I can be there with you in it. Yeah.
And then are we finding emotional regulation so that we can be, in a place where we can hear each other?
Yep.
So coming down from that, fight, flight, or freeze response, so that we're actually listening and can respond in a way that's life-giving.
That responsiveness is so key, because you can respond in ways that discount and cut down people. You can disagree and still respond in an honoring way, and then sharing. So that's
sharing
our cheers.
In a vulnerable way.
Yeah, sharing very vulnerably rather than accusation. Most arguments go bad when it's like, you did this, or it's your fault. And
if my sharing means I'm sharing all the things that I find wrong with your point of view, that's not what we're talking about.
Right. It has to kind of come from this is what's going on for me.
Yeah.
I want you to understand it, and now I want to understand what's going on for you. And it may be okay, that's as far as we can make it in terms of agreement.
So when we do conflict like that, it really leads to understanding each other more and a deeper connection, not more separation.
Right. And that's why it's not, we say we're not high conflict. Well, it doesn't get into arguing with each other or discounting each other's position. It's being able to say, and a lot of times it's just all right.
I think we kind of tend towards the other end of the spectrum. We want so much not to hurt each other that we're more likely not to bring it up at all. But that doesn't mean
that's
that
not helping.
We are on the same page.
Right.
It means we're harboring these feelings that we haven't talked about.
And we're avoiding, and that'll come up to bite us in the butt.
Right.
real quick.
Right.
Well, we talked about compromise. Maybe that should be the next one. So we've gone about. I keep forgetting the first one. Effortless
Effortless.
love.
Effortless love is number one. Taking the next step will solve the problems is number two.
Yep.
Fighting equals failure is myth number three. We
Yep.
hope we've busted those for you.
That's right.
Number four is that compromise in a relationship is always 50-50. It should be an even split.
Isn't that what compromise is? Like we just cut the baby in half,
Oh
right?
man.
That was King
Talking
Solomon's
about
idea.
that story from the Old Testament.
Yeah, and it's not just down the middle 50-50 all the time.
Yeah, well, what in life is ever a total, complete, even balance?
When we go out to eat and split the check. I think that's the only place when
Yeah.
we're with good friends
Yeah.
and we just split the check right down. It's
Yeah.
not what did you eat? What did you eat? We kind of
Yeah.
score up.
Well, that's a good example because that feels really irritating to me when people want to get down to the penny. It's
Yeah.
like, let's just, somebody might have eaten more, somebody might have gotten an entree that costs less, but let's just split it down the middle for the sake of relationship.
And it's not I don't think it's compromise, but it's not compromise in terms of like, is it just as people paying what there's grace in the relationship? And I think that's a lot of what's needed rather than keeping score and it's a transactional thing.
Right.
And we're having a lot of that in our society right now too.
Yeah.
What's in it for me? I'm only going to do this if I get equal or more back. That kind of scorekeeping is so destructive in relationship.
Yeah. And I think that's what the busting of this myth is trying to say, that if we are keeping score because we're trying to keep it 50-50, it's just you lose all the heart of the relationship.
Yeah. And I think this myth, we really, this isn't one of our, like the conflict one probably, but can you think of a time when we're like trying to make it even?
No, because I think we know that the balance tips in different directions at different. Oh, I think we have said it sometimes that when we're both struggling, we're like, one of us has to be okay. Because I think sometimes we just know there's times one of us has more resources than the other as far as just being emotionally able to give.
Yeah.
And so we understand that sometimes I do remember times when I have felt like, oh man, I'm doing so much. I think I might have even like had conversations with you about like, if we listed out what I'm doing here, if we talk about the mental load and the household load and the caretaking load, like,
And that's when I would say, I would talk to you about, if we have conflict, it means our relationship's in trouble. Just trying to shut down that conversation.
No.
But no, it was an imbalance, and it was
Right.
important for us to talk about that.
Right. And I'm sure every relationship has those moments where you feel like one person is doing so much.
Yeah.
And the times that we had that conversation, there were times when you just, it wasn't possible for things to change that much, but it was important for you to know how I felt about those things.
Yeah.
Or sometimes to say, well, what can I take off that list?
Yeah. Well, and it's really it's interesting because it's really shifted. The more doula work you did in the last 10 years, the balance has shifted in terms of even just like family things, or we go out and it'd be like, oh, it's just going to be David tonight. And we found a balance, and it has to be over the long period. Does it feel equitable?
Yeah.
Not fair, but does it feel equitable that there's this balance between give and take? If it's always one way, that's a problem.
Right.
Right. So like the 50-50 shouldn't be the target. It should be, am I giving as much as I'm receiving in a relational stance, not in terms of time or money or.
Well, and I've heard some people say the fallacy of that myth is that both partners should be giving 100%. 50-50 means we're both only giving half of ourselves, so if we're both 100% trying to serve the other, everything works out. But there are times when I think some, one person in the couple might feel like they're just giving more or more is required of them. And
Yeah.
I would say it's kind of true that my doula work helped tip that balance
Yeah.
just out of necessity because I tend to overfunction
Yeah.
and I couldn't be present sometimes, and you became a lot more aware of what was required to just be
Yeah. And there was
running our
space.
household.
Yeah. There was space, and it was just like, oh, it got to the level of discomfort that I was willing to change. And that's really something that goes to all of this is there needs to be optimal frustration. There needs to be enough discomfort in the system for it to change. And so if you are always over functioning, there's no reason for me to change.
Right.
It's not an excuse, but that's kind of the dance that happens of like, well, this is pretty good. And there needs to be willingness to drop the ball so that the other picks it up. And we had to figure out that dance in lots of different ways in our relationship. Better now?
Yeah, I think we've got a pretty good balance.
I'm just noticing, I think I have to dust after this. So we have this balance myth that sharing the load is what's important. Keeping score is not. Maybe looking over the course of a longer period of time, how balanced is it versus a daily type of thing?
Yeah, a story that helps me kind of put words to that or picture to that was when our children were small. And I think one of our pediatrician visits with a toddler, I was telling the doctor, he eats, one thing or maybe two foods, like all day long. He'll only eat these two foods. And the doctor said, it doesn't even matter what a toddler eats in a day. Look at what they've eaten in a month, because they might eat all bananas one week and they might eat all, tacos, whatever.
Yeah.
It balances out, and that's one way to look at it, is that there are seasons.
Right. And we play with that time. So, but the myth of compromise means 50-50 is not the case. Compromise is how are we giving and open to receiving in a meaningful way. And it can look different at different times and with different couples, right? Like all of this is about what's the goodness of fit for the couple. And if you're irritated, it's probably not a good fit.
Well, if you're irritated all the time, it's probably not a good fit.
That's right. Back to the argument one. All right. So we have had 4 myths and we busted them all. Now we get to the big one.
Yeah. So number 5, and I've heard this from quite a few young people, and I will say this one worries me the most, and it was never one that I believed. So this one, number 5, is jealousy equals love. Or if they're jealous, that it means they really care. It shows their passion. It shows they want to be with me. It's hard for me to even wrap my head around people looking for that or thinking that's a good sign. Because to me, that's worrisome. I think one thing we've always had in our relationship is just really open trust in each other. Like, I'm happy for you to go spend time with other people. We're not tracking each other's movements all the time. We're not looking in each other's,
that only started when you were leaving home at 2 a.m.
We did get an app when I was doing doula work in faraway hospitals, and you would wake up and not even know I'd left. We thought it might be good for you to know where I am.
It was kind of like, I wonder where Tara is. And then I'd go back to sleep. And I figure you would call if you needed help.
Right. Yeah. So, but some people really do feel reassured by their partner's jealousy. Feel like it shows that they really want them 100% of the time. And we would just caution against that being a good sign in a relationship.
Yeah. And it usually comes from family of origin and other experiences, whether it's traumatic experiences, but that there's a desire to be needed. Because there's been a lack of being seen as precious, being seen as valuable, being seen as loved. And so when there's any attention, even if it's this kind of jealous attention, it fills the well. We want to warn about that because I think that's a precursor. Jealousy is a precursor. It's not a determinant, but it's a precursor to abusive type of
control.
Behaviors. Control.
Yeah. If there's control or isolation or not allowing or things like that, doesn't speak love to me.
Yeah, I always worry about relationships where I see people being removed from their family connections, removed from their friend connections. That and it's like, oh, we just love spending every minute together. Okay, but fragmenting you from your emotional support, like we talked about, if everybody's standing up at the wedding saying we're here to support you, having those relationships cut off is a danger sign.
Right. And I think maybe what is underlying, I'm thinking about that myth, and I'm thinking what another underlying myth underneath there might be is that I should be everything to you. And you should be able to meet all my needs. I don't need anything outside of that relationship. And that
Oh,
is right.
do you
I
see my
know.
eyes?
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't do that.
Neither of us like that idea,
Yeah.
but I think we know that, sometimes that might come. We need to think about the root of where that's coming from for somebody.
Yeah.
It might be that there's been broken trust in the relationship. And so there's fear of losing that person. So there might be a lot of other things underneath that need to be addressed.
Yeah.
But if it's to the point of allowing or control or isolation, then we're moving into deal breaker territory.
Right. If I think we talked about whenever it's like, I need you is a very uncomfortable statement.
Yeah.
It's like, I so much enjoy spending time with you. It's fulfilling. Those are different than I need you.
Right.
There's a pressure to
I'd
that.
rather know that you can have your own fulfilling life and still want me in it than need me to meet all of those needs. Yeah.
And I think that's part of the jealousy, and I worry about people being seen as objects. So with need and jealousy, it's like there's this cup, it satisfies my thirst, but it's not something I have a relationship with other than what it does for me. And so there's an othering, there's a seeing as an object and not as a child of God, someone that's valuable and worthy of all good things. And jealousy leans into that. But it can appear like, oh, look at how much I'm wanted. But it's not about building up. And so I think the antidote to jealousy, this idea of jealousy is love, is how does the other person build you up?
Right.
And I ask that of our kids when they're dating, and I ask that of people that we do premarital with, is in what ways are you building each other up?
Yeah.
Which is different than in what ways are you holding so tightly to the other, you're squeezing the life out of them.
Yeah. And talking well about the other, even when they're not in the room.
Yeah. That's remarkable, isn't it? Like some of the groups we're in, I'm like, I wonder if you would say that about your wife in front of her. And if you did, I'm uncomfortable with that. So both ways, we probably should watch our relational stance. And I think that's what this is. It's jealousy is a relational stance of kind of hoarding.
Yeah.
Rather than sharing the resources of our relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope none of these have been like scary to you or depressing, because the intent of this is that we believe that work is required for a loving relationship.
Right.
It kind of went at that backwards. Love and a couple relationship is not effortless. However, it should be life-giving.
Yeah.
God gave us relationships to make our lives more enjoyable, to build up who we are, to help our identity grow. Our belief about ourselves as being worthy. So, even if a relationship takes effort, it should still be building you up and helping you become the best person.
Yeah. And maybe it would be helpful for us if we miss some myths, that you would share which myths that you believe, that you cling to, and which ones of today's conversation we helped you let go of. I'd love to hear. I basically want to have a conversation about myths and myth busting.
Tell us the ones we missed. Tell us ones you'd like us to talk about another time. But we will go deeper next week into, if this did raise some red flags for you about relationships that you might be in or that friends might be in, we'll talk more about where are those boundaries?
Yep.
When is it a deal breaker?
Yeah, and where to go. So when there are deal breakers, where to turn to, especially if you feel isolated.